Thank you, Dean Volk. So I think these things are supposed to provoke thought. And that's what I'm going to try to do tonight. I'm going to try to talk to you a little bit about public education and the necessity of technology integration properly into public education. I'm also going to talk to you about what I think the state of public education is. I'm going to start by telling you that I have never met a teacher that I didn't fall in love with because they were committed to our children. I have never met an administrator who wasn't committed. But this is the time for innovation. And it's really hard to innovate from within the institution. Innovation happens at the edge or outside the institution to impact. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, if I can get the slides right, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where we are in today's economy, which isn't a pretty picture. I'll warn you about that up front. My scores are probably going to be less than Diana Oblinger's because I'm going to give you a realistic view of the world. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where we are in terms of economic cycle and the economy today. And I'll contrast that with where we are in public education and how we teach our children today, particularly in K through 12. And those of you that aren't that far removed from K through 12, you can keep me honest and tell me if your education was different from that. I'll talk a little bit about our strategy for technical integration, and then I'll end by giving you a strategy for moving forward to really relate public education to the world that we are facing today. Okay? So let's start with a little bit. U.S. economy is in dire straits. I think we all know that. When GDP goes to negative, I know you all are computer science majors and not economic majors. When GDP goes to negative, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. And we are not just in negative territory, we are in bad negative territory. Unemployment projected out until May of 2009, approaching 9%, potentially 10%. When people aren't working, states pay benefits, their deficits get larger, there's not as much sales tax revenue to support that, or withholding revenue to support that, and the problem gets worse and worse. It's self-perpetuating. Foreclosure activity. Look at the drive between 182,000 in Q2 '06 to over 4 times that amount in Q2 '08. I'll give you one stat that'll blow you away. All of those mortgages that were interest-only payments or ARM mortgages, things like that, and mortgages that were loaned to people who wouldn't qualify otherwise, the foreclosure rate on those mortgages approaches 25% right now. And then finally, here's the U.S. deficit with a projection of what's going to happen after all the stimulus packages are done. So we're approaching $12 trillion. So we're borrowing, hedging against the future to fill a hole that is relatively unfillable. I'm glad to hear Fidelity's hiring interns, by the way, because one of the things I was going to say is, what can I tell these students about the job market today in this type of an economy? So the question is, how do we get out of this? The question is, how do we get out of this? Part of the answer is stimulus. Part of the answer is stimulus, but it's the right kind of stimulus. It's stimulus to fill the holes for those that are neediest among us, but it's also stimulus that's going to seed innovation and create jobs. It's stimulus that's going to be put towards green technologies to reduce our dependence on foreign sources of oil. It's stimulus that's put into IT to accelerate the great things about IT, the collaborative nature and the creativeness and the innovation. It's stimulus that is forward-thinking, not just filling today's holes. We've got to be very careful in the next 24 months, as we think about that, to not rely on old infrastructures and old technologies to get us out of this. We've got to look forward. We've got to seed innovation. It's the perfect time to do this and the perfect opportunity moving forward. North Carolina is not immune to what we're seeing in the economy. Our unemployment is actually now tracking above the national trend. The state budget as of January of 2009 was $1.6 billion below trend for this year in collections. I can tell you folks, I got insight today. 85% of our collections in North Carolina that go to support the state budget come from withholding taxes and sales taxes. That number looks more like $3 billion now. The state health plan and higher ed enrollment are going up. You'd think those would be good things, but that basically means that less people are working, so they're pursuing education at a community college and four-year college level. And it costs money. If you're paying state tuition, the state doesn't get recovery out of that. A state appropriation goes to filling the gap for higher ed. Housing, we're somewhat contra to national, particularly here in the Triangle. We've held values pretty well. And one of the things that I'm interested in, obviously, as Mladen said, not only am I on the Triangle Transit Board this year, but I'm also the treasurer. So I'm worried about our collections, and our collections are down because gas prices are lower and the gas tax is less. So we can't build our way out with infrastructure. All that in mind is to say that we have got to have equal parts of supporting those that are hurting right now with forward-thinking innovation. So I'm going to show you a slide that some of you have seen, but this is my history of the world's economy in 5 minutes. And you'll have to judge me on how I do on this. An economy is about markets, it's about infrastructure for moving goods and services, and it's about communication to build those markets. So 3 things, think about it. It's about the market I can serve, it's about my communications infrastructure, how can I build that market through communications, and it's about transport. How can I get those goods and services out? And we've really went through 4 phases of economic transition. The first was agrarian. I grew enough stuff for me and my family. If I grew a little bit more, I traded with my neighbor, and I had a very small geography around me because maybe the wheel hadn't been invented yet at the beginning of this. But I had very little mobility around, and the way I communicated was not electronically. The way I communicated was face-to-face. So I grew enough for sustenance for me and my family. Then we started to go into the industrial age, where I as a person, because of machines and operations, I could produce more than what I needed. In fact, at the end of the industrial age, I could produce mass-produced goods that I could trade outside my geography because air transport and vehicle transport came into being. I had a larger reach, there was infrastructure in place, and 54% of the value of that economy came in producing goods and services. I went into the information age, where the communications technology at the time, the underpinnings of the internet, allowed me to exercise labor arbitrage. I, as a company owner, could look for the best place to produce my goods. I could look at my value chain from raw materials to end product and say how I acquire and where I acquire those raw materials and where I manufacture those goods. I can search for a best price. This stage killed North Carolina. We lost 300,000 textile jobs because those textile manufacturers realized that there were labor markets where they could get that good produced a lot cheaper. What communications allowed us to do during this time is that allowed us to remote monitor that manufacturing. So what you all do in IT allowed us to remote monitor that manufacturing to make sure it was still at the same quality level as when the plant was down the street or in the same area as corporate headquarters. Labor arbitrage. Well, folks, we're not even in the information age anymore. We're in the creative age, where that entire value chain, from innovation through raw material, through end product production, that entire value chain can happen anywhere in the world because of the technology infrastructure we have, the way we can move goods. Ed Carney will tell you Bob Greenberg will tell you that they work on projects now at Cisco and IBM 24/7. That a development team in Bangalore and a development team in RTP can work together on the same product innovation 24/7. And they can seamlessly do that because of the communications technology we have today. That is a huge change. It used to be in the US that we had the monopoly on the innovation side, that the creativity and the innovation happened here and we outsourced the lower value stuff. Doesn't work that way anymore. The communications infrastructure that we have today allows us to put the work where the creative mind is and where the talent is, and be able to do that work seamlessly over time. So I'm telling you this for a reason. It's a little bit of foreboding, but I want you to start thinking about your K through 12 education and thinking about how your K through 12 education may have prepared you or not prepared you for a world like this, where value is with the creator, not necessarily with the geography. Bob, you'll recognize this slide because it's an IBM slide. This is, over the last 150 years or so, the adoption rate of innovations in the economy. How many years did it take to get to 25% adoption for all of these different technologies? And you can see the automobile, if you chart that out, it took about 90 years to get to 25% world adoption of the automobile. Look at the cell phone. Less than 10 years to get to the adoption rate of 25% penetration for the cell phone. Competitive advantage in an innovation is shrinking. Adoption's happening faster, and people are expecting more features, more applications, more tools to be introduced. We're consuming those at a much faster rate. Your competitive advantage for a product lessens greatly quicker than it did in the past. We require more innovation to drive value. MIT, the economists at MIT say the rate of technical progress is accelerating. So we're going to experience, if you take the history of the world, in the next 100 years, we're going to experience 20,000 years of relative progress. If you take the history of the world and how we've progressed over time with innovation, the next 100 years relatively will yield 20,000 years of progress. Again, we're consuming innovation at a much faster rate, and companies that want to drive value have to innovate faster and faster. If you look at the difference between generations, some interesting stats from the Forrester Group. The 18 to 28-year-olds will be the first that are internet dependent. They use the internet more than they watch traditional media, television, things like that. The internet's where they get their information. Look at text messages. I have a 14-year-old daughter who sends 2,000 text messages a month. It's the way she communicates today. I am really glad I bought the all-you-can-eat plan from AT&T, as I'm sure most of your parents are, because it's the way you communicate today. It wasn't even on the textbook 5 years ago. It wasn't even within my wheelhouse for communicating. I send them all the time now. But it just tells me that I've got to continue to use those platforms as we have. It's hard enough for me to stay current. But I've got to use those platforms that we have to innovate faster and faster. And those are my kids sitting in a classroom, too. It's not enough just to give them a network, but we've got to engage them in the way that they think and in the way that their world works in order to engage them in school and to educate them. So again, the speed of innovation. You know, it used to be that innovation happened in these nice 4 quadrants. This is one diagram of a million you could use. There was a research phase, there was a test phase, there was a deployment phase, and then there was a commoditization phase. If you look at the history of the internet, go through DARPANET, all of those innovations that ended up being deployed as the commercial internet, that fit nicely into these 4 quadrants. and it probably took about 25 years. The browser was involved. You know, in the mid-90s, we started to see some nascent early adopters in the deployment, and then we finally reached commoditization in the mid to late 90s, and it was widespread use of the internet. Look at today. They are currently building, both at SAS on campus and in the California and Nevada desert, 100-mile, well, at SAS it's a 1 mile by 1 mile, but in the California and Nevada desert it's a 100-mile by 100-mile solar field capture site. It's new innovative technology, new innovations in photovoltaics, all those things that happened in the last probably 2 or 3 years. So they're building these panels where they consecutively connect them together to make a 100 by 100 mile field, and they will produce the energy they predict to be able to power the city of Los Angeles from this 100 mile by 100 mile field. So the research phase lasted about 6 months. You'll laugh. The first piece of this innovation happened where? Where do you think it happened? Happened at Google. Google has a model where 10% of the time of the employee can be spent on anything they want to do. And this happened on a Google engineer's desktop. Why is Google interested in power? Well, they want cheap power to run their big data centers that they're building. That's why they're in Lenore, North Carolina, because the power is cheap. So you get the innovation. It used to be that that would take 25 years to deploy. Folks, they're building the solar field right now. The power is already bought for that solar field. We are collapsing these 4 phases of research, test, deployment, and commoditization into, instead of a 20-year, nice kind of compartmentalized cycle, into a 2 to 3 year cycle. Ideas are coming faster. We need to produce people we need to produce students that can produce ideas faster. We need to be nimble. We need to produce people who can think quickly, innovate quickly, collaborate across the wide area quickly. Does that make sense to everyone? A 20 to 25 year phase collapsed to a 2 to 3 year phase. So what's it mean for our students? Well, Fast Company did an article in 2005 that talked about what skills our students need to flourish in the innovative economy. And it's one of the best things that I've seen. They really identified 3 types of skill sets that move into an innovative workforce or a collaborative workforce. 3 sets of skill sets that were necessary for that. The first phase is the learning phase. So it's the anthropologist, the experimenter, the person who can take ideas from different disciplines and bring them together to make a plan or a base plan for a new product or service. The second skill set is an organizer, and this is a person that can bring people together to talk about conversation across the wide area and innovation across the wide area. And the third phase is the builder, which is what majors most of you students are in. Computer science is a building major, right? It helps bring people together with the collaborative tools, but also the engineering phase of this and other things is the experienced architect, the designer, the actual product designer. All 3 of these skill sets are necessary in an innovative economy. And in fact, I would tell you as students, if you can't play in at least 2 of these areas, your value is very limited. So when you think about your education and you think about what experiences you're going to have, you're going to want to build skill sets in at least 2 of these areas, because that's where you really add value. You want to be a learner, you want to be an organizer, or you want to be a builder. I think everybody needs the organizer skills. I think everyone needs to be able to collaborate. We can no longer be the programmer behind the PC or the network tech. We've got to be the person that adds value for collaboration, that can explain how those collaborative tools that ride on top of the infrastructure that we all manage help bring innovation. Okay? Nick D'Onofrio has a great, first time I heard this presented, Nick talks a lot, who's the former senior vice president of research at IBM, talks a lot about T-people. This is just another way to describe that concept. Everybody needs an area of focus. And that's the vertical line in the T. That might be computer science, science, math, engineering. But also everyone today, and to engage in the modern world, needs those skills at the top across the horizontal line. The ability to synthesize, the ability to articulate, the ability to collaborate. So we need these T people, but what we currently do in K through 12 education is that we're still caught in the industrial age. We're not just one economic transition behind anymore in K through 12, we're two. We're still having kids do bubble tests. How many of you folks that at least were in the high school in the last 5 years, how many of you did bubble tests for your end of course tests? The majority of you, right? Does a bubble test teach you how to synthesize, collaborate? Does it teach you how to be articulate? But that's how we reward our teachers, is the scores on those bubble tests. Now, we have to have some way of measuring mastery, but we also have to think creatively. It can't solely be that bubble test. So we're caught in an education system, even with all the technology that we have, we're caught in an education system that produces industrial-aged kids for the creative age economy. Where do you get your best experience in the creative age pieces of this? Outside of school. But you have to power down to come in. Again, not indicting teachers, not indicting anyone else. We, as a country, have not put the thought or the resource into public education to help it change. We haven't created the sense of urgency. So, thriving in the creative economy, we want to connect what we have in public education today to the outside world, which is why we do what we do at MCNC, right, Gigi? Yeah. We want to be dedicated to innovation. We want to bring innovative practice here, and we want to relate it more to the creative economy. We've got to move out of the industrial age. What technology allows us to do is two things. Technology allows you to take bad practice and accelerate your race to the bottom, right? If you're doing things bad, technology will allow you to do it faster, and you'll hit bottom faster. So that's a great thing, right? Because at least you'll know you're there, and you can declare bankruptcy. If you're a Wall Street financial services company, you can look for TARP money. Or, if you're doing good practice, it accelerates and scales that good practice. What we found today is when you stand in front of a classroom with 30 learners, that's exactly what you have. You have 30 learners. And instead of standing up in front of that classroom and teaching them all the same way, like I'm talking to you tonight, technology allows you to be a facilitator that allows you to personalize that learning plan, at least part of it, to every student that's there. That's why we do what we do. So a little bit about the North Carolina story. You can't do a lot of this stuff without bandwidth, right? You can't personalize the learning experience. You can't do synchronous video. You can't take a master physics teacher from the School of Math and Science and beam them to the northeastern part of the state where they don't have a certified physics teacher in 4 districts. You can't do that without bandwidth. But yet, when we talked about America's digital promise, schools are still challenged with bandwidth. In fact, 67% of schools today restrict use of the network, not because of the Child Internet Protection Act, the CIP Act, but because they don't have bandwidth. In North Carolina, before we did what we did, and I'll show you in a second, there were a lot of reporting requirements back to the state for the districts. Literally, the position of a technology director at a school district in North Carolina, before we were engaged in the connectivity initiative, 15 to 20 days a year, they would walk into classrooms and schools into their district and say, I'm sorry, you can't use the network today because we have to administer the 8th grade computer test. Or we have to do this report, an average daily membership report to the state. Bob, I don't know, on earnings day, does Sam call you and say, I'm sorry, Bob, we're crunching numbers, the RTP site can't use the internet today? Right. If I'm a teacher and you tell me to help deliver e-curriculum over this infrastructure, and you tell me it's not going to work 15 to 20 days a year, or I'm not going to have access to it, I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to stand in front of kids for 45 minutes messing with technology when I'm supposed to be teaching. So again, we're reinforcing in this realm an environment that doesn't reward innovation. My assessments are old. My infrastructure's inadequate. I'm going to do the same things I do because I get rewarded based on the old system of looking. So where we were at MCNC, we operate the North Carolina Research and Education Network. You knew I'd get to it sometime about what we actually do. So the North Carolina Research and Education Network has existed for almost 2.5 decades. It existed as a microwave network to start that the state invested in when Governor Hunt was here, when Governor Hunt was in Hunt 1 and 2 as opposed to Hunt 3 and 4, for those of you that know Governor Hunt. He actually was governor for 4 terms, but there was an 8-year gap in between the 4 terms. And during Hunt 1 and 2, he had a couple of interesting ideas. And the second of which, the interesting idea, the first of which is that he wanted to create a great research center where they did microelectronics research. And they worked on things like chips, and they worked on things like the underpinnings of networking at that time in the early 80s. And they partnered with good companies like IBM that had come to the park to create innovation that maybe could be commercialized by the market. And that was a very successful part of the business. The second part of the business that they got into was creating a microwave network so that the universities in the university system, at that time there were 16, could share information with one another and share content. And they did that over a proprietary microwave network. We made the transition to an Internet Protocol-based network, an IP-based network in the mid-90s. And we had a great exit, a very lucky exit on the research side that allowed us an endowment so that the state really didn't have to invest a lot in that network. MCNC invested about the $60 million from its endowment to create that IP network. We had great partners like Nortel, Lucent, Cisco, IBM that helped build that network as well, our corporate community. So up until May of 2008, we had a nice network that connected the 17 institutions of the University of North Carolina system. The reason I say 17 is that the School of Science and Math was adopted about a year and a half ago as one of the institutions of higher ed. We had about 7 community colleges. We had about 10 local school districts on the network, 24 out of the 36 community colleges, the Biotech Center, the Research Triangle Foundation, RTI, used to be Research Triangle Institute, all shared this common research and education backbone. So we had an intranet set up that we could share content, educational content, and research in the wide area. In May of 2008, the state asked us to put every K through 12 schoolhouse on the state on that backbone and create an intranet for education in North Carolina. Here's where we are today. We have 110 school districts on the backbone. We went from about 100 endpoints to 2,500 endpoints. Scott Rawls, who's a good friend of mine, who's president of the community college system in North Carolina, likes to brag that you're no further than a 15-minute drive from a community college when you're in North Carolina, or a 50-minute drive, I think. Well, folks, you're no further than a 5-minute drive from an endpoint on NCREN now, no matter where you are in North Carolina. This is a very powerful platform when you think about it, because your local grammar school now, I'm still using the word grammar school, your local K through 5 school, for those of you that don't know what grammar school means, your local elementary school is not just an elementary school anymore. It is connected to a network that makes it a K through 20 educational institution. It is connected to a network where it can access content from the University of North Carolina online in an expedited way because it's hosted on that network. You all understand that as computer science majors. The way we used to access content before in K through 12 is that we would use the commercial internet. Really restricted what you could go after. Really restricted the ability to do things like synchronous learning. Now it looks like this. Before, when you were going up into the cloud, not only were you doing things that were like that 8th grade computer test, but we were basically taking a very high latency path to go grab that computer test in North Carolina, bring it back through the cloud, and deliver it to the LEA. So not only were the pipes inadequate, but we had a delivery system that was inadequate. Most of you haven't heard of Judge Howard Manning. Some of you probably have. Judge Howard Manning is probably the most powerful person in education in North Carolina. He is a district court judge in Wake County who is overseeing the Leandro case, which is our equity of education in schools, and he controls several $100 million of what can be put in education. It's akin when I talk to legislatures and have to reach the legislators on this. I basically say this would be like you waking up in the morning in Raleigh and having to drive to Jones Street to the General Assembly building, but driving through Washington, D.C. to get to the General Assembly building. So starting at your house, Senator Bass Knight, in Northwest Raleigh, driving to Washington and coming back in. That's the path that we were following. Again, this gives us a very powerful platform because everything's local. These applications, content, tools are locally hosted. We peer with Internet 2 and with National Lambda Rail, so we can grab content from those and keep them on net without having to transverse the commercial internet. What we've basically done is create a very powerful tool in North Carolina for teaching and learning that makes that technology director's job not just going around to a classroom and saying, I'm sorry, you can't use the internet today, but in thinking forward about how can these 3 third grade classes simultaneously stream video from Discovery Streaming and other and Showdoor and other places to actually enhance teaching and learning that's going on in the classroom. That's what we've allowed people to do over the last year. We're ahead of schedule. We've got great folks working on this. We've got a great team at MCNC, team of NOC engineers, other things, that, and we're actually kind of growing a little bit because we're getting more and more mission out of this. But we've got a great team that's actually executed and made this happen. One of the things we can do with this is that we are now in the hockey stick phase of growth of e-learning adoption in North Carolina. These are stats from combining e-learning at the 3 sectors of education in North Carolina, K through 12, community colleges, and higher ed. You can see that we have doubled the number of course enrollments in the last 3 years and doubled the number of credit hours. So we're on that great CAGR, about a 30% compounded annual growth rate for e-learning in North Carolina. The bandwidth growth, however, is even greater because we're starting to, at the beginning of this phase in 2005, 2006, we were basically scanning textbooks and just driving that text down the pipe. And that's all we could do with the way we were delivering it in most cases. Now we're talking about things like incorporating Twitter into and IM technologies into the content as it's delivered, using virtual worlds as part of the content delivery, really engaging kids in worlds that they engage in themselves outside of education for social things and for fun. We're bringing those technologies into delivering content. North Carolina Virtual Public School, if you haven't been to their website ever, go, because you'll start to see some things about what we're doing. I've seen classes now on researching Marco Polo, for example, that use virtual worlds, that show a swimming pool and kids playing Marco Polo to deliver the content of what Marco Polo explored, all in a virtual world with an avatar. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but what this platform allows us to do is to drive collaborative services, applications, and tools down that pipe. And there are a set of core services that we have to focus on, things like a single ID to log into every service, federated ID management, things that are foundational, creating learning objects repositories where content is published by K through 12 teachers. It's a little trouble when we get to the university level. People like to copyright things at that level. But K through 12 teachers are much less concerned about that. They will publish an algebra lesson into a learning objects repository and let every other teacher in North Carolina look at it and play with it. Tom, there's a great opportunity here for an Apache-like community, right? Where you publish a piece of content as a teacher and we all work on it together and we make it better. So a Red Hat model of curriculum development happens. Applications, again, what we're trying to do with the network is centralize the delivery of those applications. The apps vendors love K through 12, and I apologize if any of you are here. Because the way they sell into K through 12 right now is that they can go to every district and have a contract in every district and put an appliance in every district and have an individual contract that creates a revenue stream for every district. We want to take things delivered from a cloud, basically, that says, no, you have one contract with North Carolina, and we negotiate the heck out of that price for an individual license fee across that cloud, and we drive efficiency and we make this a less costly idea. Things like web conferencing, things like classroom capture can be hosted in one spot, a large green data center, and delivered over the cloud to every K through 12 district. It takes the stress off that technology director that probably isn't qualified to service that app anyway, or do break fix on it quickly, and it also is an efficient way to do it. So we've got to explore a lot of these technologies, but we have the platform now to do it. So I'll end with a couple of things. First of all, we set a scorecard for ourselves for K through 12 education in North Carolina about 4 years ago, and we said this is what the 21st century student needs to look like. And I did a couple of things, and I won't do the read of the slide, but we still have 80% of our kids, when you look at globally competitive students, at the high school level, still 80% of our kids are in the bubble test model today. We have about 20% of innovation. We've done some good innovation around the edge, but still 80% of our kids are in that old model. How many folks know what the dropout rate is in North Carolina? It's 30% at the high school level. We lose 30% of our kids. How many people think that that's a good prospect without a high school diploma in today's economy for a job? We're going to end up either in prison or we're going to end up on a welfare list somewhere, costing us billions of dollars that we could be plowing back into education. We're less than 50% proficient on the NAEP math test, which is it's actually an international standard. A couple of other things on here. The good thing is that the state developed a great data tracking, data mining program called NCWise, but it didn't have the networking infrastructure to deliver NCWise so that it would work. So we wanted to get digital portfolios online, we wanted to track students, we wanted to track effectiveness of teachers, but up until this year it didn't work in about 60% of the districts we tried to deploy it to because we were delivering it through the commercial internet cloud, and it's a latency sensitive application. So that actually works now and we can start to use some of this data tracking. So if you want to look at a system, we've got to think about leadership in this. We have a governor now who is going to come out with a vision for education, and in fact she's already made a move. And I'll give you just a practical thing. So when we have an issue with the university system, I knew directly who to call with that issue with the university system on the network. We'll call Erskine Bowles or somebody in Erskine's office, Jeff Davies, who's Erskine's chief of staff. If I have an issue with the community college system, I call Scott Rawls or I call Sandra Williams. It's an easy, there is a single point of control. When we started working with K through 12 in North Carolina, well, you would think that you would call the elected superintendent, that she had the power. But about 20 years ago, the State Board of Education, through the General Assembly, wrested away most of the day-to-day control. And there's a deputy superintendent who runs the department on a day-to-day basis. And then there's also a chief financial officer who controls the purse strings. So when we had an issue with K through 12 during this deployment, I had to think about who to call. And most of the time I had to call 4 people. I had to call the state board chair, the CFO, the deputy superintendent, and the superintendent. No one's in charge is what I'm trying to say. You're not really successful when no one's in charge and no one's accountable. So the governor's taken steps almost immediately to do that. But again, we're all going to be involved in this, and she needs to call us all to help relate what's happening in K through 12. So who's accountable across K-20? How do we involve K-20? How do we involve the broader community in this? Our gap today is that we haven't done enough to relate the real world, particularly in K through 12, what's happening in the real world to what's happening in the classroom. Part of that is education's fault, right? Particularly at the K through 12 level, education has been a closed door exercise. I don't want to show you how I teach. I don't want to show you how I administrate. Just give me money when I want it for a special program. Part of it's been we haven't been aggressive enough. If you ask the question to a parent this way, are you satisfied with your school? 70% of parents will say yes, I'm satisfied with my school. We never ask the question, do you think our education system is producing the type of student that's going to thrive in today's economy? And the answer to that question, when we've started to ask it, and the Gates Foundation started some work on that, is that only about 25% of people think we're producing a student that's employable in today's economy. So if I had to give you one call to action from tonight, it's figuring out how to get involved at a community level with your school district. One of the things we're working on at MCNC in partnership with the Gates Foundation is exactly that. We're looking for districts across the state that have opportunities in science, technology, engineering, and math, and we're creating community conversations about what that STEM opportunity means in the classroom. There will be burgeoning efforts like this. The governor has plans to do something similar statewide. I can't express to you how urgent this need is to get practical, real-world idea and view into public education as it exists today. We are not producing the types of students. We've got the infrastructure now. What we need is the people and the practical experience in there to move education forward. We need to have people from the business world talking about things like how we assess our students, and does that relate to what they're going to have to do in their careers. We need to talk about how do you teach. We need to talk about things like experiential learning, where children actually work on projects. The last time I checked, science isn't taught real well from a textbook. Science is a hands-on experience. Computer science is a hands-on experience. You learn partly by doing, you learn partly by book, and now we're only doing book in a lot of our places. We've got to figure out how to cross that chasm. I hope I didn't bore you to tears. I hope I scared you a little bit. We are disconnected, but there is hope. I start to see innovation around the edges that technology can help to scale. And I think we will resolve this within our generation. I think we will start down a path, but we've got to work on things like the dropout rate and engaging kids. Thank you all, and I think we have about 10 minutes for questions.